In November 2024, Kemi Badenoch became the leader of the Conservative Party, which is the oldest political party in the United Kingdom's history. This is a remarkable feat, not just because Kemi is the first black woman to lead the Conservatives, but also because she grew up in Nigeria, a country she now despises. But why does Kemi Badenoch hate Nigeria? In this episode of Odd Nigeria, we are going to explain why the first-generation immigrant wants nothing to do with the country she spent most of her childhood growing up in. Sit back, grab some popcorn, and relax as we take you down memory lane. Welcome to another episode of Odd Nigeria. Before we go on, we'd like to remind you to subscribe to the channel to see more videos from us. We have so many quality video essays and interesting documentaries coming your way in the coming days, and we would hate for you to miss out on that. Now, as we start, it's important to note that despite the title of this video, Kemi doesn't see her entire Nigerian experience as negative. In fact, in an interview with the Free Press, she said that growing up in Nigeria certainly shaped her character. How specifically that happened and whether or not she's grateful for that experience is another story. Kemi comes from a reasonably wealthy background. Her father, Femi Adegoke, was a general practitioner who would later found a publishing company in Nigeria and become a civil rights activist in the country. In Kemi's childhood, her father worked in proxy with oil companies when Nigeria was smack in the middle of the oil boom. As a doctor, he would treat their workers and had clients who were doing very well for themselves at the time. Her mother, Feyi, was a professor of physiology in America and also lectured at the University of Lagos. Kemi has two siblings and is actually a not-so-distant cousin of former Nigerian Vice President Yemi Osinbajo. Her grandmother, who never had a formal education, was a wealthy woman who was successful as a trader and sent her children to study abroad in the 60s. By all indications, Kemi had a wonderful life ahead of her as a Nigerian. However, whatever happened between the ages 1 to 16 really rocked her world and changed her perspective of the country forever. Now, although she was born in St. Teresa's Hospital, London, Kemi's family returned to Nigeria in 1981 when she was less than a year old. The story goes that Kemi's parents had planned to use her as an anchor baby to secure citizenship, as the law in the UK at the time allowed automatic birthright citizenship for those born in the country. Kemi has denied this though. She insists that her parents didn't even know she was eligible to be a citizen until she was 14 years old. Anyway, back to the story. After she returned from the UK, Kemi spent her childhood shuffling between Lagos, Nigeria and the United States, where her mother lectured. Badenoch, as she will eventually be known by much later after her marriage to her husband Amish, studied at the International School, University of Lagos, one of the best schools in Nigeria at the time. Kemi's family lived in the Surulere area near her father's hospital. An old friend of her parents said that they were upper middle class and recalls that the children never lacked anything. Nevertheless, Kemi returned to the UK at the age of 16 to live with a friend of her mother's, owing to the deteriorating political and economic situation in Nigeria, which affected her family. She went on to study computer systems engineering in the University of Sussex, complete a master's degree, and study law at Birkbeck College, University of London. Kemi would also go on to join the Conservative Party at the age of 25, become an assembly member, and eventually become a Secretary of State for Trade before becoming the leader of the Conservatives. But all that stuff comes later. For now, let's focus on the lost years of Kemi. Now, Badenoch refers to the Nigeria she left behind as a socialist state. If you are not Nigerian or you were not alive at the time, you may not understand what she means by that. But basically in the 80s, most services and sectors in Nigeria, from education to IT and even health infrastructure, were state-owned and state-run. And this had several implications for the average Nigerian at the time. For instance, when she was in Nigeria, Kemi says she wasn't even able to pick her school. The government assigned her a school. When Kemi was in secondary school, she recalls waking up at 5 a.m. to cut grass, saying it gave her blisters she still feels like she has to this day. But that wasn't the experience that broke the camel's back. One fateful morning, Kemi walked to a tap in her family's private residence to wash her hands, and after turning the tap on, nothing came out. The water had stopped working. Her family would eventually have to dig a borehole, disconnecting from the state-run water company at the time to service their water needs themselves. This experience made a deep crack into the facade of the comfortable life she had come to expect as a young Nigerian with successful parents. For a period of time, she had to go and fetch water with her bucket at a local water pump about a mile from their residence, lugging it around every time she wanted to take a bath, do laundry, or use the toilet. Kemi would eventually say that being middle class in Nigeria still meant having no water or electricity, sometimes taking your own chair to school. In her first speech when she became a member of parliament, Badenoch recalled doing her homework by candlelight because the state-run electricity board could not provide power. But that wasn't even the last of it. Eventually, as Nigeria's economy continued to nosedive in the 80s and into the mid-90s, the Adegokes had seen enough. Kemi decided she wanted to go to school abroad for her tertiary education, and at first, she had her sights set to go to Stanford. She wrote the SATs and got good grades. However, she only received a partial scholarship for her efforts, and her family could not afford to fund her education because of their economic realities. She regrets not going to Stanford to this day, and it would not be surprising if Kemi holds this experience closely to her heart as an instance of Nigeria killing her dreams. She would eventually settle for the UK as her education destination. At the time, her father gave her the equivalent of £100, which is worth around £240 today, and he gave her his regards. She would eventually go on to live with her mother's friend and also worked service jobs to make ends meet. Going back to the street Kemi lived in Lagos more than 30 years ago as a teenager, one can easily understand her position. But how Kemi feels about Nigeria now wasn't all about how and where she lived. You see, back in the 80s and 90s, Nigeria was embroiled in its most tumultuous political era, with much of that period under the rule of military regimes. This had a profound effect on Nigerians at the time. Kemi recalls that her parents, although academics, didn't have political opinions or debates at home. In her own words, politics was very social and cultural, she says, recalling that time. It was very much about standards and excellence because it was a very competitive country. There are only so many university places. You had to do well or you would fail. And you look out the window and there are loads of people who either failed or never had a chance to begin with. She also drew attention to the fact that Nigeria had no long-term plans for the well-being of its citizens. There was no social security, she says. No benefit system, no safety net. Safety net was only family. So people had loads of children because that was what took care of you after you got old. After marrying Scottish banker Hamish Badenoch, he took her husband's name. At the Conservative Party conference in 2024, Badenoch contrasted the freedoms she experienced in the UK to her childhood in Lagos, where, in her own words, fear was everywhere. She vividly described the city as lawless, recalling hearing neighbors screaming as they were being burgled and beaten, and wondering if her home would be next. Again, during a tour of the US, she described her home city as a place where almost everything seemed broken. Kemi, to date, says her experiences helped shape her conservative ideals and set her against socialism. As expected, Kemi's comments were enough to rile up heated debates between cross-sections of Nigerians both in the diaspora and at home. In some respects, her comments were so bitterly received that the current Vice President of Nigeria, Kashim Shettima, suggested that she remove her first name if she did not feel pride in her Nigerian heritage. Badenoch has stood by her comments about Nigeria and does not identify with the country except through her ethnic group. So what do you think? Is Kemi's deep disdain for the country of her origin well-founded? Or do you think she's being a bit harsh? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos from Odd Nigeria. See you next time.